What's up, everybody? Look at that guy, that smiling face. That's Ira Chaffel. If I could say his name, that'd help to start the show. Managing editor, Warchant. He knows I know him.
His sunburned face from the
Yeah.
6 hours at the softball stadium yesterday. It was beating down on us, but at least they got the W. It would have stunk if we got the sunburn and they lost the regional, but they came through.
I was gonna say you didn't even come back from Amelia Island with that kind of a sunburn.
No.
So here we go.
This was earned watching Catherine Sandercock. Let's I'm gonna tilt one back for
cheers, Catherine.
Yeah, cheers to Catherine Sandercock for the perfect game.
Hold on. I'm giving her the good stuff. We're going with the highlight out of Tampa, baby. We're going.
Oh, there we go.
Here we go. This is for the real heroes right there. There we go. Let's get it on, everybody. To Cat.
Perfect game, man. Perfect game. You know, it's funny when I was telling.
Good when it hits your lips.
I was telling one of my kids last night, Alexa, that who goes to FSU. I was telling her, Cat Sandercock had a perfect game, and she's like, "Isn't that what that Tampa pitcher almost did to your Orioles last year?" I was like, "Yeah, but almost. He didn't get. We did get a hit. We got a hit in the 8th, I think.
Yeah, it didn't quite happen now, did it? And the stakes were high. The stakes were high, as De La Soul would say. That was a big moment, man. They needed all of that dominance from Sandercock, and good for her, man. She's been here for 9 years and dominated all 9. I tease, but it's awesome. I saw where our very own Aslan asking questions afterwards. Did a great job with that question about, is it because of the moment that you dominate, that you rise up to that, or is it, it's a way that you can focus or block it out that allows you to dominate? And I think it's a great question because one of those two things has to happen for athletes to excel to that level in that moment, Ira. The ability, whether it's Brooks Koepka yesterday at the PGA Championship, Florida State's own as well, or it's that moment in a regional or any kind of athletic endeavor. Does the moment define you, or do you define the moment? And it's hard to do. It's really hard to do because we're all subject to nerves, man. We're all subject to the knowledge that things, if they don't go the way you want them to, it can feel like a catastrophic moment. And then your brain starts going down the wrong path. So good for her, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, and it was actually cool also because when I did that story a couple weeks ago about the kind of the mental toughness thing that they've really worked on this year, they brought Ellie Cooper, a former FSU softball player, became a mental conditioning expert. They brought her back on the staff. And one of the things she said, she called Catherine Sandercock her mental conditioning or mental performance gold star because she's got this ability to just block everything else out and just focus on executing that pitch. And I asked her when we were talking, I was like, do you believe in clutch? And she's like, absolutely not. It is all about preparation. It's all, and we can have that debate. I do kind of feel like there is a clutch. There's a little bit of a clutch in certain people.
It's not a gene.
Not a gene, but some people have clutch and some people are not quite as clutch. But she said really she believes, and her studies show, and I think, it's probably true, is that it really is all about preparation and being so prepared and so able to focus on just the task at hand. Not because I was thinking, like, when Sandercock went out for that last inning, is she thinking, okay, I've got to do more than I've been doing? Because I think that's where your mind plays with you when you're pitching a perfect game is like, do you try to ratchet it up and then do too much and then maybe now you get behind in the count? Or can you just keep doing exactly what you've been doing? And I think that's what she was able to do.
I don't have my glasses on. That's T. Swifty.
Yeah.
You
want me to read it? Or you got
No, I got that. I can do that. Okay. Think of how the pressure of last year's failure is off their shoulders, making it through regionals. This team's ready to relax and go on a run. Right. And the question mark on the end suggests that is a question. I don't know the answer to that. I think it is tough to rationalize the struggles to score there in those two games. But they found a way to get through. I don't know. Do they suddenly feel like, oh, we made it past the first round? I mean, listen, last year was the outlier. That wasn't the norm. The outlier for this program was that disaster that occurred last year against Auburn, right? Ira, I mean, that was terrible. But prior to that, they won big and cruised and won a national championship and gone out there to the national championship. So they've been pretty consistently damn good. Last year was the outlier. But now, if you make it 2 in a row, I mean, obviously that becomes the conversation. If they had lost yesterday, if they had lost over the weekend, Ira, holy moly, that conversation shifts real quick.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's what it is. It's not so much. It's not like they were the Broncos or the Bills or whatever that went so many Super Bowls and couldn't win. It's just when that happens, then there's the questions. There's natural questions about the quality competition in the ACC versus the SEC. There's questions like that, and then if it had happened again, that's what you're fighting is you want to make sure it doesn't happen again. But again, Corey and I were texting last night. He was kind of harping on the lack of offense, and I get it, but I also think that it's not. They were going up for 7 of the 14 innings. They were going up against a dominant pitcher.
Yeah,
the girl from South Carolina. I mean, she threw over 70 miles an hour. I mean, she's bringing gas, and she was a good pitcher. And so, I think that was a challenge. And then they had scoring opportunities in that second game. They just kind of ran out of a couple of them, trying to be aggressive. And that's what their game is. Like they can turn with their aggressiveness. We saw it in the ACC tournament. We've seen it throughout the year. Their aggressiveness can turn a 1-run inning or 2-run inning into a 5-run inning. But you also can run yourself out of an inning.
Yeah.
And that's the risk reward there. So I think, they had a couple of tough plays like that happen. And, I don't think the offense is elite, but the pitching is elite, especially when Kat Sandercock's on the mound.
So congratulations to them. And then, you and I talked earlier on the JCS. We won't spend any time on this, but Florida State baseball did take 2 of 3 on the road against Louisville. I just thought it was a nice representation that they fought all the way to the end. They took a game off the number 1 team in the country in Wake Forest and was close in another game, and then they win that series. And I know Louisville has been on a downward slide, but still, for a program that really didn't have anything going for it, they did fight to the end and maybe get some guys back and feel good about the buy-in factor. Maybe that's it. I mean, I got a call today from a buddy of mine down in Miami who's in love with college baseball, and he's watched the Canes and the Noles and the Gators, and he was lamenting how good Florida is. And he was saying, hey, I didn't get a chance to see you guys a lot. I saw you guys when you came down here. And he made a mention. He's like, is Link just flipping that roster? Like, what's going on? Like, none of us outside of Tallahassee can understand how it is Florida State's not in the postseason. And it's a reminder of how consistently awesome Mike Martin was. The 11's legend is intact. And, yeah, man, they had some bad teams in the past that found a way to win 10 or 15 more games than they should have.
Yeah, and I think they're definitely going to be flipping the roster, and I think that process is going to start pretty quickly. And look, I mean, if you look at, it's kind of amazing when you look at the roster. I mean, they've got they've got guys on that roster that are pitchers that were never given really an opportunity, or when they got an opportunity, they just could not get anybody out. So there's a lot of spots that they can be filling. A lot of the guys that played this year, I don't think are going to be back. And I think there's going to be a lot of tough conversations. But Link Jarrett, I think, did the right thing. He honored all the scholarships to guys that signed as part of that recruiting class. I think he gave everybody a fair chance. I think he gave the returning players all a fair chance. But at the end of the day, man, that guy's paid to win baseball games, and his staff, they're paid to win baseball games. And baseball's always kind of been that way anyway. I mean, baseball, way before the transfer portal, would constantly they would meet with players at the end of every semester, at the end of every season, and say, okay, you got 20% this season, you're going to get 40% that season, or you got books and meals last. There's always that kind of, that's part of the nature of that, because they get partial scholarships. And I think there's going to be a lot of tough conversations and players finding new homes. And I think you're going to see Florida State go really aggressive in the transfer portal.
So we go from the spring of hurt feelings that I talked about now on into the post-baseball season hurt feelings realm, and that has to happen sometimes. Let's get to some questions that were posted earlier. Will it be the summer of hurt feelings for much of the baseball team, which is funny? Yeah, I think so, William. I think that's what Ira's hitting at. Yeah, without question. Also, Joseph asked, how do you guys feel about seeing those ACC taxes returns coming out? Everybody's going to want to continue to talk money. That's never going away. I think that we've beat it over the head. We've had to.
Right.
Have you posted the roundtable yet? Is that up tonight?
Yeah, I put it up a few hours ago this afternoon, and so people can read that. We've got a roundtable where it's Jeff and me and Gene and Corey offering our opinions on a bunch of different questions. There's also a video with me, Gene, and Tom, and discussing some similar questions, a little different take on the same topic. But yeah, I mean, yeah, like you said, we're hitting it from all angles. The Florida State and the ACC. Just it's. I think using the marriage analogy, I think is has been appropriate. You've been beating that for the last week or so, and I think that's appropriate.
Yeah, I figured you'd like a couple of the quotes I had in there regarding. Well, I had to point out when he said we're very thrilled about being in the league and we want to stay. Bit much for me to stomach. I did note that, but I also noted that I would be a bad actor in these negotiations. I have noticed that.
I thought that was funny. One of the questions, something along the lines of sharing revenue differently to try to make things work, and Jeff's like, "Well, if the spirit of this exercise is to make things work in the ACC, I'm not going to be much help here."
No, I'm out. You guys can go to hell. And I basically insulted everybody not named Clemson in the conference by telling them that their television ratings do not a goddamn thing for any of us here. Nobody watches you. So we're going to go ahead and take 80% of the revenue between Florida State and Clemson, and the rest of you, you're screwed. That's how it's going to work.
And again, we've talked a lot about conference stuff, and we don't need to do we don't need to do 60 minutes out here. But I do want to get one thing off my chest. So one of the things brought out by one of the media members at the when we were at Amelia Island was that since the end of the 2014 season, when FSU had their great run, that FSU was 32-32 in the conference the last 7 years or 8 years, whatever, and how basically and everybody kind of chuckled and was this is a school that's asking for more money, and they've basically been 500 in the conference. Okay, fine. That record is better than Wake Forest record over that time frame. It's better than several other schools many other schools in this conference over that time. And it was Florida State's down years. It was when they had a coach on the way out, another coach who got fired in 2 years, another coach coming in on the heels of that, and in a pandemic. And they still were 500 in this league. And Wake Forest, who's kind of seen as the golden child right now of the conference, and Dave Clawson, I respect the man. I think he's a good coach. But he said, if we're going to do revenue sharing based on wins and losses, performance on the field, and investment in football, I'll gladly sign up for that, right?
Good luck with that, Dave. Good luck with that, buddy.
Right? Dave Clawson has had one 10-win season since he's been there. And they've won more than 8 games one time. He's won more than 8 games one time 2 years ago since he's been there like a dozen years. So the standard that everybody holds Florida State to is completely different than everybody else. And nobody has done crap in this conference. And that's why the conference is in part of why the conference is in the shape it's in. But it's like, I love when they try to take shots at Florida State not carrying the flag. Who else is carrying the flag other than Clemson? Nobody else has done anything.
Yeah, the answer is Clemson carried the flag the last 8 years. Florida State did prior to that, and
Clemson did nothing before that.
Yeah, only Florida State mattered in this league. From the time they joined it until Clemson finally did something, only Florida State mattered. Obviously, Miami's done nothing since arriving. So listen, I get it. Everybody's got pride in their school. Everybody's got pride where they coach, where they work, where they went to school, where they're from, all of it, as it should be. But it can't get twisted here. Florida State and Clemson are the only 2 brands in this league. Maybe Miami. They do have history. There's no denying Miami's history. There's very little to latch onto here in the ACC. But even still, that cachet of all those titles, 5, I believe it is, probably resonates even still in other parts of America. But that's still a reach. There's nobody else. Nobody's watching Wake. We saw all the numbers. Nobody's watching North Carolina football. They're not watching Duke football. They're not even watching Virginia Tech football. They're not.
And the thing, and again, I feel like I hate to kill Clawson because I do think he's a good coach. And I actually do like him. I like talking to the guy.
Yeah.
He's a smart guy. But he said, well, how much of that the ratings is self-fulfilling prophecy? Like he goes, when if they're always going to put us on ACC network, what kind of ratings can we get? It's like, listen, man, they're not putting you on ACC network because you draw good ratings.
Dave,
they're putting you there
over who gets you on.
They're putting you there because you don't draw good ratings. Like, it's not a chicken or the egg. The egg is that you don't draw good ratings. I mean, it's not. What are we debating here? I mean, Florida State at 5-7 is going to get way more people watching them than Wake or NC State or Virginia Tech. Half these teams at 9-3. It's just the reality of it. Florida State's a brand, and you're not. So this conversation, and then they're so reluctant to even come off of a penny when it comes to television ratings revenue. Well, man, you're going to get what you're going to get. I mean, and they're going to reap what they sow.
So I think, Ira, it's interesting because you get why, if you're Boston College, if you're Wake Forest, if you're Syracuse, you're saying to the league, like, no, I'm not going to acquiesce to Florida State's demands because we've got them locked in until 2036, and we've been told there's no way out. So screw them. Let them kick and scream and tell them to pound sand. I want my money. And that's what they're going to do. Now, you and I might say, well, buddy, it's pretty short-sighted because you may get your money for the next 2, 3, maybe 4 or 5 years. But the second there's a loophole, the second there's a way, they are out of this conference, and Clemson's following, and this thing doesn't exist anymore. And now you got no money. Now you're over here with the MAAC. Now you got nothing. So you may want to try to make this work. In fairness to them, if I were going to take the other side and argue on their behalf, it's never going to work. It's never going to work. I would hold Florida State's feet to the fire and not pay them a penny if I were them, because it's never going to work.
I understand what you're saying, but what's funny about the whole thing is, okay, so like, and I was one of the people that said you can't do uneven revenue sharing because look at the Big 12, and everybody got mad that
Texas, right?
Texas got all the money, so everybody else wanted to leave. But it's and I get it from a theoretical standpoint. It doesn't make sense to say, okay, all you teams are going to be in the same conference. You got to compete against each other, and we're going to give some of you less than we give the this one school or these 2 or 3 schools. I get it, but also like that's on a macro level. That's what's happening on the national landscape. You know, the Big Ten and the SEC are getting more money because, and it's not like ESPN or Fox or whoever's like randomly choosing that. It's business decisions. Mm-hmm. Those schools are bigger. They're public land grant universities with huge alumni bases. They get huge numbers when they're on television. And these small ACC schools, these private schools, do not. So so I'm not mad at ESPN for it, but it's the same thing. We're trying to compete with this conference, trying to compete with those conferences with half the resources. I mean, that's not going to work either.
Yeah, I think that, and I had some harsh words to say when Michael Alford was a little lovey-dovey on his way out the door. I get it. It doesn't make any sense to continue to belabor the point. I don't think there's a solution. I wouldn't be going to these meetings anymore talking about a solution. There isn't one. The solution is you need to let us go. We got to figure out a way. I don't know what that is. I mean, I'm the guy yelling from the stands. I'm throwing stuff onto the field with no solutions. I'm not helping anybody.
Well, the reality is the problem with, and we're all to some degree uneducated. We can only go by what we're told by people because the grant of rights is out there. That's been made public, but the media contracts are not. You can't get your hands. The reason these attorneys from Tallahassee and Clemson and other parts of the conference are having to go to Greensboro to look at these records and these documents is because they're not public records.
Just for lunch, Ira. It's just an extended lunch. It's nothing to see here. Don't mind my attorneys as they scour your living room. We're just having lunch.
But that's the thing. Like you can't. But for years, it's funny though. When we talked about like for years, everybody said the grant of rights is like ironclad. There's nothing you can do about it.
Don't anymore, do they?
And in fact, David Hale the other day in his tweet thread, he had 25, 30 tweets or whatever about this topic. One of his tweets in the middle was that from talking to several sources, and he's been one of the people that says that you can't get out of the grant of rights. He said, I've talked to several ADs who say they believe you can make a compelling case to get out of the grant of rights. He said, but if it was that easy to do, everybody would have done it already. Well,
not necessarily.
Let's not jump to that conclusion.
Yeah.
you got to make sure everything's lined up before you do something like that. So, again, it's there's information we don't know. There's information we're not privy to, but I think we all know that this is not sustainable. This is not tenable.
My final question to you on this is, and I kind of pressed you on this when you came on the show, and I always appreciate that you're candid with me, and the kind of questions I'm going to ask you. What I think, if I'm listening to this and I'm diehard Nole, and I'm sitting here going, okay, great, we get it. This is the impasse. Got it. When would Florida State say, okay, it's time. We got to take our risk here. We can't go another year falling this far behind. Is it 2 years, 1 year, 5 years? That's what people want to know. When are we going to see real movement and real actionable steps taken?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be a lot sooner than 5 years. I mean, it could be this year. It could be within the next year or two. Wow. I just, again, I don't know exactly when it's going to happen.
Sure.
But there's no point in waiting. I think they've done what they can do from a due diligence standpoint. They've tried to make it work. Again, I'm not saying that they definitely have to do it in the next year, but it would not surprise me if they did. I just don't think time is not on their side when it comes to waiting, because the further you go down that road, the worse it's going to get. So I would be more inclined to think it's going to be in the next year or two than I do think it's going to be anywhere close to 5 years.
I'll get to you, William, in a second. Khalil writes, Virginia Tech and Nebraska have, without a doubt, had the biggest fall from grace in college football. What two schools have had the biggest rise in college football over the last decade? I love this topic because I love college football, Ira, and I think we both love college football. We love, and that's why it's frustrating for a lot of people who love college football. Like, a lot of things, a lot of changes have occurred in college football. Not all have been for the better. We all were in favor of players. Most of us were in favor of players getting paid in some capacity, but not some willy-nilly Wild West manner by which it's gone on, in which tampering occurs all the time. And you've got unscrupulous agents and runners that are offering things that aren't real, and it's not unilaterally enforced, and we don't know, so all these things, the budgets, any of that stuff. It's truly just kind of wide open, and we'd like to see it. And people would argue, well, the market will correct itself and all that stuff. In the interim, college football gets screwed, and fans have a hard time watching their sport shift from collegial to professional. Right. And I get all of that. But I do love college football, and I do love the big picture stuff. It's hard for people because we're old. You and I are old now, Ira. And we can remember, because I'm 51. I think you're 51, right?
52, buddy.
All right. So we can remember when Georgia Tech and Colorado split a national title. Say that out loud. Georgia Tech and Colorado split a national title. Neither of them will see the playoff in the remainder of our lifetime.
But also, real quick on that.
Yeah.
So it's 33 years ago, and that's the last time anything other than Florida State or Clemson in the ACC has done anything. But anyway, continue.
Florida State wasn't in the ACC at the time it happened. That's right.
But Georgia Tech was, and it was 33 years ago.
It would not have happened. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Sorry.
Yeah. So, okay.
Yeah. So you do have, there's a combination of, some schools that have a moment.
Yeah.
Have a moment, or some schools that rise or fall. But few of them sustain. I think it's probably more rare to sustain, right?
Very, very rare. What's happened to Nebraska is, I just sit there, it's mouth agape. Like Nebraska, we remember, because Florida State's rise coinciding with, really, you're talking about the state of Florida being in the preeminent state and region in which college football is played. I bring this up all the time. I saved that Sports Illustrated that had Florida State, Florida, and Miami on the cover. And it basically, in essence, said where college football is played. Right. And it was the king of the land, the whole state, right? You had everybody kicking ass in this state. And those were wars. And I remember as a Florida State guy thinking, well, it kind of sucks that Florida and Miami don't play each other. Florida State has to play both of them, and that aggravated the hell out of me. And it cost Florida State, by the way. But that said, I remember those games were the be-all, end-all. That basically was for the national championship or a shot at it. And you can think about that time frame. You could never envision a time where those teams would go from that to not mattering. And what I mean is the only other team that was talked about during that time, rightfully so, turned out to be Nebraska. And Nebraska, after losing to Bobby Bowden in 93, you saw it, Tom Osborne devastated yet again. I've made the joke that the monkey jumped off of Bobby Bowden's back, sprinted across the field, and leapt upon Tom Osborne's shoulders. And we thought, oh, my God, you poor bastard, that's it. But now he obviously got it together. And then they became every bit a part of that decade that Florida State and Miami and Florida were, if not more. They don't matter. They cease to exist. They don't even matter at all. And Virginia Tech, whom Florida State beat in 99 for the national championship, game I was at, Todd Van Dyke, my buddy, and I, we were screaming our heads off. It was an incredible time, all that. Nobody would have thought at that time, man, Virginia Tech is going to no longer be relevant in any way, shape, or form come 15, 20 years from now. But that is the reality. They are so down right now. And it's not, I won't say, hey, blame it on them. But the ACC could use a little help from some of those middling teams. You need an NC State, a North Carolina, and a Virginia Tech to be really good if you're going to belly up against the big boys of the SEC and the Big Ten, and they're just not. They're just not at all.
Yeah, and Khalil, I'll try to answer your question here in 1 second. But touching on the Virginia Tech part, I do think, and I'm not lobbying for the ACC to get back because I do feel like Florida State needs to get the hell out. But I do feel like Virginia Tech, man, could be something with the right coach because there's so much talent in that area.
And they care.
It's a great stadium. It's a great environment.
The stadium's awesome and they're loud. Yeah.
I mean, I think the last time we were there was the game where James Wilder trucked the dude and Rashad
Green. That was a big down run right there, baby.
It was. That's a cool environment, man. When that school is right, it can be good again. As far as the question, Khalil, and thanks for the contribution. UCF's obvious. I think Greg and Spiel mentioned that in the chat. I mean, they're not at the level of the upper echelon necessarily, but from where they were to where they are now, I think it's been pretty impressive. I'm trying to think it's impressive. I think a couple of the Texas schools kind of getting back, SMU and TCU kind of getting back to something, TCU making the playoff. But I don't know, is that sustainable? Does anybody think they're going to be there? I think you like Sonny. I don't know. Aslan likes Sonny Dykes a lot.
I like Sonny Dykes a lot. I think he's a good coach. Yeah. But I think you could argue TCU, big picture, Ira, has been one of the bigger surprises in college football. Right. They kind of supplanted K-State under Bill Snyder in a way. When you think about where they were. Oregon, somebody said Oregon. They're right. I mean, we would not have guessed back in the early 90s. Maybe we wouldn't have. Maybe if we had known Phil Knight was going to pour hundreds of millions of dollars into the program, we would have guessed differently. But nobody saw Oregon coming.
So something you were just saying about the 90s is something I was just talking to somebody about the other day. There's a guy that I saw a podcast with Jordan Reed, who does NFL stuff, I think for ESPN now. He was on a podcast and he was talking. He played quarterback at North Carolina Central, but he talked about being a Florida State fan when he was growing up.
Oh, wow.
And I was thinking to myself, how many kids around the country, how many people around the country, if you were – college football is really becoming college football really in the 90s. I mean, it kind of started in the 80s, but where it became saturated on television was the 90s, College Game Day and all of that. Well, man, if you were a young person and didn't have a college allegiance, Florida State probably might, depending on what your personality was, what you liked.
Sure, a little flair.
But if you like, you think about Charlie and Work Done and, all the way up to Boulware to Winky. And it's just like, there's probably a generation it speaks to why the brand is the brand. It's not just about people who went to Florida State. It's not just about people who grew up in the Sunshine State or near Tallahassee. It is people who are our age, maybe even a little bit younger, who were impressionable college football fans in the 90s, and Florida State was Florida State. And that's why you are the brand that you are. And I don't know that schools that come up now can recapture that, because those schools had a platform that I think was a lot stronger than it is now. Because right now, there's a million channels. There's a million distractions.
Yeah, you think about the 90s, you're right, Ira. There's a lot. Maybe maybe it is bias on our part. We're right of that age, and both you and I graduated college then. We started covering the sport then. We started, that really kind of feeds right into our time. But I think you're right. Also, you remember those games, like Notre Dame mattered. It was a big effing to do to play Notre Dame there, and going back and looking at that in '93 and thinking about what that game meant with College Game Day. And it was the first ever College Game Day, right? So you're talking about the birth of all of this, the coverage becoming elite, to where all of a sudden it was appointment television. Like that, you tuned into College Game Day. That's what happened. You just did that. Craig James was a part of that, and all those guys, and it was a lot of fun. But it's interesting. I think I was trying to go back to thinking about brands that have fallen off or brands that have really risen. You brought up UCF. There's no doubt that's one. I don't think we're really missing anybody other than, like we mentioned, Oregon. Some folks brought up Clemson. You got to remember, under Ford, Clemson won a national championship. Now, that was the one and only time they had done anything much of significance, but I remember that title. I can remember that. There's – I don't know. When you
Clemson was a brand really until Florida State came into the ACC and just took it over.
Yeah, they kind of best represented the ACC in a lot of ways, at least within the realm of football. The ACC was always thought of, rightfully so, as a basketball conference, and they cherished that reputation. And when you have Krzyzewski and Dean Smith, that's going to happen. And when you're the conference with Michael Jordan and James Worthy and Christian Laettner, and you can go on to Grant Hill and on down the line you go. Ira's favorite player, Bobby Hurley. I mean, you had a lot of.
Get up and slap the floor.
Let's go. It's a fun topic, and it's an easy one to fall back into. Where it's going from here, I think a lot of people sort of loathe. Somebody mentioned they think that I think Greg thinks that Colorado will be relevant, very relevant, apparently, in the next 2 to 3 years. Greg, I won't say – you never say never. I'm too easily quick to dismiss. The reclamation project that Colorado has under Deion Sanders is massive. Massive. Most everything about that program is miles away. They're miles away from a relevant recruiting region, miles away from winning, miles away from mattering facility-wise, and they have not much in the way of players and certainly no depth. It would be a massive undertaking to see Colorado somehow find their way to the college football playoff in 3 years. If it happens, Deion can pick his job.
Yeah, no question about that. I think there's probably two separate questions. One is, what's it going to be in the short term? Because I was talking to a family member of one of the FSU softball players who has a family member that goes to Colorado now for grad school. And he was talking about the excitement there right now. They've sold out their season.
Finally.
Obviously with the spring game they sold out their season tickets. And man, it's got to be infectious out there because Deion's Deion and because of all the hype they're getting. But the odds are when you replace 2/3 of your roster in a span of 3 or 4 months, it would be unbelievable to think that they're going to be like good. And they've got a tough schedule. So what's it going to look like? How's Deion going to handle it? Because these are the questions that we're going to have to see. How's he handle it if they go 3-9 or 4-8? And he's got to answer questions every week about how bad their team is and how much they're losing. And you can't just do what you did 3 months ago and say none of these guys are good enough to play for me, because you brought all these guys in. And that's kind of the point where Norvell got to last year was that roster was Norvell's roster at that point.
He had to win last year. Yeah,
he had to win last year. Those are guys he brought in. Now you could say he had disadvantages, COVID, whatever. He signed off on those guys, and these guys are going to be guys Deion brought in. And I think Brennan Gant and Amarian Cooper and some of those guys are upgrades over what they had before,
without question,
no doubt. Are they going to be good enough to beat good football teams? And they've got some good football teams on their schedule. I don't know. And then you got the whole issue of bringing it together so quickly. So my guess is I'd be very surprised if they have a successful season, but then now where do you go from there? Because when he went to Jackson State, it was winning right off the bat. And it just kind of steamrolled from there. it's different building a program. And if you have you experience losing with guys you brought in, and then you can't get rid of all of them again. Like you got this 1 year window, you're going to be stuck with these guys. So
they're hired guns right now. So
there's a lot of, I would say the odds are not in favor of that working, but I also think the guy's impressive and he does a lot of smart things. I mean he's been successful, and so I wouldn't say 100% it can't happen, but I would say the odds are against him.
Yeah, me too, Ira. Me too, buddy. I think it's going to be remarkable if it gets turned around. But hey, we'll wait and see. We'll all watch together. It's one of the reasons we love the soap opera that is college football. As it pertains to Florida State, I did an interview today on SiriusXM. I really like Dusty Dvorak. I think he does a good job. And he had me on today, and we were talking about Florida State. And, he thought Florida State, I brought this up today on the air because I wanted to point out to people that while you and I and Tom and most of the people on the beat certainly think Florida State is on the cusp of having a great season and being a top 10 team and reasonably having expectations that they could win the conference and go to the college football playoff. I'll just leave it there. It does matter to me to kind of hear sometimes what other people who travel week to week covering college football and deal with other programs, and they get dropped into these practices for the week and their prep leading up to a game, and they interview coaches and players. What do they think, and what have they seen elsewhere? Now, it's easy because you and I both know Alabama's going to be good, Georgia's going to be good, Ohio State's going to be good. Probably name 2 or 3 others that we know.
Southern Cal's going to be good.
Yeah, Southern Cal's going to be good, right. They'll have a really good offense. We know that.
Yeah.
So, all right, so that's fine. Where does Florida State fit in their mind? The people that have traveled to Southern Cal, that have traveled to Columbus, the people that have traveled to Athens and been there, what do they think by way of comparison? And the more, and you get asked to do a lot of shows too, Ira, so the more you go on these shows, a lot of them national shows, the more you really realize that a lot of people think very, very, very highly of Florida State. Paul Feinbaum's the exception.
Yeah, I think that's he wasn't real. Paul wasn't real high on the 2013 Noles, if you remember.
He thought they sucked.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had a conversation with him about it at the airport, in the LAX airport. I think he enjoyed it. But yeah.
Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead. If you want to finish.
No, suffice to say, I don't think he's ever going to be impressed with Florida State. That goes back a ways. But
no,
there's a man that hated Bobby Bowden.
Yeah. Well, the perception of Florida State, it's interesting to me, and this is something I think we'll probably talk about as we get closer to the season, and maybe at some point we're right about it. But I do think when you compare Florida State to the Georgias and Alabamas and some of those, I feel like they're not. Let me put it this way. I think Florida State, if you consider the whole 2 deep or 3 deep, I think it's as impressive as most of the teams. What I don't know is how many of those elite guys on the line of scrimmage are as good as the elite guys on the line of scrimmage at some of those schools. Like Jared Verse is, without question. Is Braden Fisk? Is Darrell Jackson? Is Josh Farmer?
Jackson is
Fabian Lovett? Well, consistently though, is he?
Well, it's a money year. He's got to play.
Well, yeah, he needs to. But again, I'm just saying.
You trying to make some money here, Darrell? Let's go, baby.
The point I'm trying to make is there's a little bit different level, I think, at the top line of scrimmage guys from probably the guys Florida State has. I think they're better than 95% of the teams out there, maybe 95% of the teams out there. I don't know if they're as good as that top 2% or 3%.
They're not.
But they do have great depth. And that I think is, and I don't know, again, I'm sure some teams do and some teams may not, but I do think the depth is closer to what those teams have. Like if Florida State brings in their second team defensive line, I think it's probably as good as a lot of those other teams' second team defensive lines. I'm just not sure the top guys are as high as the top guys on those teams that are going to be in the playoffs.
Yeah, when you think of Georgia, you think about Davis and Carter and those kinds of guys that have gone. I mean, those were.
I just don't know if we see that. is what I'm saying.
There's nobody. Yeah, I agree with that, Ira. I don't think there's really anybody on this roster that would be comparable to those two guys we just named. And, Alabama's had some guys in the last few years where you're like, ooh, that's a grown-ass man out there playing football. I mean, Florida State now has, I think, a better roster than everybody in the ACC.
I agree.
I think they have the best roster in the ACC.
Yep. If that game, the only thing that gives you any pause, I think, with Clemson is the fact that the game's at Clemson.
And if it's a night game at Clemson and they're having to try to, listen, it's not Clemson's roster doesn't suck. Right. And if they're at home at night, and they are at home, and it gets to be an atmosphere, and that Florida State's not sneaking up on Clemson. Like, they know, like, oh man, Florida State's got their dukes up. It's time to get it on. So I think that in a lot of ways, I think Florida State's going to win the rematch in that game and win the ACC that way. And that's a whole nother conversation. On paper last year, LSU had the better roster. On paper this year, LSU probably has the better roster.
Well, I'll say this. I don't know if it's as complete as Florida State's is. Like,
but think it's game one, so there won't be worn down by attrition.
Right. But I also think they filled more. I feel like they filled more holes. There's more
well, they get an all-world defender back that got hurt in the first quarter of that game against us.
He's a perfect example. He's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Like, I don't think Florida State has anybody like him.
Right.
Or Perkins. Like, those guys are a different level. Those are, now Florida State has versus in that category.
Yeah.
But I don't know if any of these other guys are. So that's what I'm talking about. But I do think Florida State, man, when you think about it, and Florida State's in the same situation there, they benefit from being the first game too, is that, if Florida State doesn't have injuries in linebacker or safety, I think this is a very complete football team. Now, if you do have some attrition at those two positions going into the season at some point, then, that's going to make things tougher.
Yeah, and we always hyper-focus and really delve deep into the team we cover. So we know the nuance of every team, every segment group, I should say, of Florida State. Somebody's doing that, for LSU, and they would maybe come on here and say, yeah, listen, I love them on the offensive defensive line. I think they're really good at quarterback, love the receiving core, a little nervous about this. And we'd go, oh, okay. And if you and I were on that show, we'd be like, love the offensive and defensive line. The starting groups are really good. They're deep on the offensive line. They're deep in the interior of the defensive line. Love what's happened to the receivers and tight ends. Obviously, a very deep running back room. A little worried about linebacker and safety.
Right.
And that's kind of what that's what we'd say. And they don't have elite corners either, let's be honest. Now, Florida State needs, sorry, I got carried away. Fentrell Cypress has got to show up and be the guy that they thought they were bringing in and that we've seen play at Virginia. If he's that guy, and I'll give him the chance to be that guy. I think
yeah. And just from talking to some people since, the spring, and I think he is going to be that guy. I think some of the things we saw that we wondered about in practice, and again, we always don't know exactly what we're seeing in practice and what they're working on.
Right.
I think they're very confident he's going to be that guy. So we'll see.
Yeah, and he was a guy who, by the way, had an air of confidence about him no matter whether he played well or not in practice. He was just kind of like, I'm good. Yeah. Nice catch, buddy. He didn't seem all that concerned. I think he spent a lot of time trying to figure out what they were doing. I think he's learning scheme, learning verbiage. I think he's trying to figure out what they were doing, which stands to reason, by the way. How big an impact do you think Patrick Surtain's going to have? I couldn't get a sense of that in spring at all. I really couldn't. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I know what he was as a player. I know what his resume is. I loved him. And Z-Chan, I'm going to get to you, baby. But I loved the hire. I just didn't get a sense of what he was or wasn't, or what he was doing specifically to change that group in spring. It's just spring.
Well, and it's hard. That's the one position we had a lot of people ask us that during the spring. Like, what are you seeing from Patrick Surtain, and what are you seeing from that group? They practice on that far field. Like, once we go up into the state baseball stadium to watch, the DBs are almost always on that far field, and so we really can't ever hear communication. Alex Atkins and his group are on our side of the field. A lot of times, the offensive players, tight ends, you hear Chris Thompson, you hear the receivers, Dugans, but it's really hard to ever hear what's going on with the DBs. But I would say this, I just go back to that one thing that Mike Norvell said, and it was the conversation, we've had this conversation before when he talked about, I think you might ask him the question, talking about trying to create turnovers.
Yeah, I did ask him the question because I thought it was kind of, I'll be honest with you, I just thought it was rhetoric, and I wanted a specific
I liked
answer.
it. I liked his answer because I do think what he's trying to say is,
no. Listen, hold on. I liked his answer, but when he was just kind of
before that, right. I agree.
I'm like, man, no. That's why I asked the question.
Well, it's one of those things where I think it's hard to answer it without crapping on the last guy.
Right.
But I do think, and what I took from it is that Patrick Surtain played like a dog, and he's going to instill that in those guys. And again, love Marcus. I like Marcus Woodson a lot more than you did. I liked him fine, but he was not that kind of player. He's a guy that grew up wanting to go to Florida State. Well, he didn't go to Florida State.
Listen, just so everybody knows, it's nothing personal with me.
I know, but you didn't think he was as good as they could do.
I thought he did a poor job, and I was glad they got rid of him. Yeah.
But I think Patrick Surtain, again, I think he brings that air of that's your ball. And it's not about just trying to make a play. Mm-hmm. It's your ball. Go get that ball. Go make the play. And now whether or not you've got players who can physically do it, we'll see. But that was one of the things I got from that is I do feel like he thinks he brings that mentality, that's just a little bit different.
Guys, you should know this. I love that we get this opportunity to have chats and hang out and talk and just kind of, I don't know, compare notes. When the beat sits up there at Hauser, we all kind of sit together. Now, listen, just so everybody knows, most of us all get along with each other. I mean, there are a few exceptions. Every now and then there's a guy on the beat that you're like, I hate that guy. But for the most...
But we work with Corey, so what are we going to do? There's only so much we can do.
Well done, sir.
Yeah.
So every now and again, there's a guy. But for the most part, we all compare notes. I mean, certainly not story ideas. And I won't tell everybody my thoughts on very specific thoughts on people, but I do a talk show. So it's different than you writing stories. I'm going to tell you what I feel on Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday and Monday. I'm going to end up having to tell you that. But one of the things that I think is kind of enjoyable is that you begin to learn who it is that Ira likes and doesn't like, who it is that Tom likes and doesn't like, who it is that Jeff likes and doesn't like, or Corey. And that goes for everybody else on the beat. It could be me, it could be anybody, right? We all know kind of like, hey, he's not a big fan of that guy. And we hold on to it. We all hold on to it. Like, we'll see. It always makes me laugh because invariably, a lot of us get it right and a lot of us get it wrong, and everybody takes turns doing both. So what's funny is, it'll be like, I've got this thing. There's a certain tight end that I'd really like to see play linebacker. God help this beat if he ever does. Right. But there are guys that you look at them like, I just don't see it, guys. I don't know what it is. I just don't see it. And then there'll be pushback. Ira will be like, you're nuts. He's great. Right. One of us will be right. One of us will be wrong. We've both taken turns on this. It's really kind of funny. Like, is there anybody right now that is sort of that debatable, like if you brought the beat together, you get half one, half the other? Is there a player that you would name on that list? Because I was trying to think about this the other day. Yeah. Who is the guy, listen, we did this on the air on Seminole Headlines, which airs tomorrow, by the way, from 1 to 3, everybody. I thought Johnny Wilson was a great get. I thought he dropped too many passes. Turns out everybody was right about Johnny Wilson. He's a mismatch. He's a great get, drops too many passes. You'd rather have him than not have him, no doubt. So, that's fine. That's all fun and games, and we're going to continue to watch. And I'm rooting for that kid because I really like him a lot. And if he catches,
I think there's a couple guys. I mean, a lot of the times it's because of we're having to make either educated guesses or using our instincts and gathering information. Like, look, everybody that's watching this right now that watches the games can tell you whether or not somebody played well that day. But then it comes to, okay, well, why didn't they play well? And could they play better?
And that's the debate.
A few examples right now in defense are the linebackers and Akeem Dent. Akeem Dent's a perfect example. And I was talking to somebody the other day about Akeem Dent with the program, and they believe that if you go back to the first half of last season, Akeem Dent had decided to come back last season. I think he considered maybe transferring. I mean, he had come on the year before, and he comes back last year, and it was his money year, like you talked about earlier with Daryl Jackson.
Mhm.
That's a thing.
It's
That's
a real thing,
right? Yep. Well, as it can manifest as a defensive back, especially as a safety, where you sometimes are making decisions about what you need to be doing. Maybe you can make 5 different decisions on a play, but what's the best decision, or what's the decision you think could lead to an interception? Those may not be the same things. And I think the feeling was early last season, he was taking himself out of plays by trying to do too much. And then if you go back and look the last half of the season, they feel like he played really well. And if he plays like that this season, they think he's going to be really good. Now, could I make that argument 100% conviction? Akeem Dent's going to be great this year? No, but it is good to have that information that there's a reason they are confident that he can play better than he did for last season. Linebackers is another one, man. I just don't think those guys were healthy. I think Tatum Bethune, when you look at what he did at UCF and you look at what he did not healthy last year, I think he could have a really good year. But I also understand people who are doubtful that he could be that guy. And I'm talking to one of them right now.
Whoever these people are, yeah. Hey, listen, I thought it was a great pickup, and there were moments where you saw how productive he could be. And I saw the film at UCF. You're right, man. That guy is everywhere. He's got a great sense for the game.
And we know he was not healthy last year. I mean, again, we couldn't talk about it at the time, but there were weeks where he did not practice but played on Saturday. So if that's the case at linebacker, that's going to limit your ability to make a lot of plays.
Yeah, no doubt. I just also don't like the depth there. But, there's a lot of stuff.
That's fair.
We're going to see. So I'm going to serve you a softball here because I'm also going to be listening as I walk to the fridge and grab a beer before we sign off, and we're going to do these last 10 minutes together. The new coach, we've had 4 questions about the new off-the-field coach.
Oh, okay.
Secondary.
Anthony Midget.
Yeah, so I want you – Ira, that's not the proper nomenclature, sir. So I want you to please inform us who this is and the addition and all that. I'll be back in 30 seconds.
So, yeah, Matt Zenitz, who's with On3, which is our corporate overlords. We're part of the On3 network. He's very plugged into coaching hires. This isn't usually the time of year for that, but it is right now. Florida State is expected, you see it on the screen, expected to hire veteran NFL assistant, former Virginia Tech All-American Anthony Midget. Anthony Midget was a defensive back at Virginia Tech. He's from the state of Florida. He's from Clewiston, Florida. He actually coached high school football in the state of Florida and South Florida when he got out of playing, when he finished his NFL career. And so he's a guy that's got connections in the state. He's also spent the last several years, I think 4 or 5 years coaching in the NFL, maybe 6 or 7 years coaching the NFL with the Titans and the Texans, coaching defensive backs. And he will not be the defensive backs coach of Florida State. They already have Patrick Surtain and Adam Fuller, but he's another support staff role. My guess is he'll be a senior analyst on defense, helping with the defensive backs. And that means he can't coach players, but he can be part of game planning. He can be part of recruiting from in the offices. He just can't go on the road recruiting. And man, it's just, you're adding a guy who was on an NFL staff. He and several assistant coaches last season with the Titans got fired in January. So that's why he's available. And I don't know. We don't know yet. I don't know yet the connection with Adam Fuller or Mike Norvell, but they were able to bring him in. And it's not officially on the staff yet, but if Matt Zenitz reported it, that's probably what's going to happen. So it's just another nice addition to the support staff, which, again, they've kind of been doing the last 2 or 3 years, really beefing up that support staff.
Yeah, and Ira, unlike some people, I allow my off-the-field assistants to coach anytime they want.
Sure.
These rules do not apply to us. The NCAA doesn't really matter. You go ahead and get out there and coach them up, boss. Let's go.
What's funny is I didn't even really, there's a lot of nuances there, but there's actually legislation where they were talking about letting all those guys coach. Basically, just the NCAA saying, you know what, let these guys coach. I mean, if you're going to have all these analysts, whatever, let them all coach. It didn't pass, but I think it may at some point. Alabama's got 100 of them. Georgia's got 100 of them. Florida State's get to where they need to be, not necessarily anywhere as big as those staffs.
So at the end of the day, again, I guess
we lost Jeff.
No.
Oh, you're back. You're back. You're back.
I should be all right. Yeah. Luckily, it's toward the end of the show. If it happens again, I'll just tell everybody I love them and we'll sign off. But somebody asked about the Braden Fisk injury. He worked hard in the spring, guys. He was out there running every day and getting after it physically. Just couldn't hit. Just could not involve himself in those drills that we see the defensive and offensive line get into. They knew about that shoulder injury and the surgery that was required. They already knew all of that. And so I guess, I think he's going to be all right. Z-Chan, evening, gents. If you could have one player from FSU in the last 20 years, who would it be and why? For this team?
Thanks, Z-Chan. Appreciate it, by the way.
Always.
One player from the last 20 years. So you'd probably say either linebacker or safety, right?
Yeah.
Telvin Smith. I feel like you kind of end up going back to Telvin Smith. He's a nice player, but although I don't know, because I don't know if he's a great.
What about Ramsey?
Inside linebacker. Ooh, Ramsey would be nice.
Freaking shutdown corner that you could also play safety.
Yeah, he'd be nice.
Damn good player.
If a healthy Derwin James
used properly, a
healthy used properly Derwin James would be nice. I don't know. Yeah, I think definitely defense. There's offensive side of the ball. It's just like, man, they're where would they? There are guys that would play over guys they have, but you don't need it. I need pick your favorite linebacker. Vince Williams might be really good in this defense, because they're more of inside linebackers. They're not sideline to sideline guys.
Vince sure had himself a pro career, didn't he? Man, golly, did he turn that around? He was amazing. I don't know. I tend to go secondary here. Derwin James, Jalen Ramsey.
Ooh, right. Z-Chan asked us a question just so we could get it wrong, just so he could come back and get it right. He says Aguayo.
Oh, stop.
Hey, come on now. Hey, don't hold your Bucks animosity towards Aguayo.
I am. I'm projecting.
If you get 2013 Aguayo on this team,
I don't know.
Come on, man. Come on. Show some love to a kicker.
He was great. I need real football players out there, and I don't. He was a good, very good kicker.
You're just trolling Keith Cottrell at this point.
No, and my favorite thing was he made a huge kick at a game I was at down there in Miami that just you could have seen like the life leave those people when he made that kick.
Yeah.
They knew like this son of a bitch just made a 49-yarder with the game on the line, didn't even flinch. It's down the heart.
He had no fear until he went to your town.
Well, and then he gets to the NFL, and all of a sudden he's scared of his own shadow.
That's not a bad choice, though. But yeah, otherwise I'd say linebacker.
It's not a terrible choice. If we're talking about real football players, I'm going linebacker, safety, corner. If you're talking about a guy that is important to your team, but whatever, then you're talking about. I don't know, boy. I think we're done here, boys and girls. Cheers.
You want to wrap it up? So T Swifty threw out Timmy Jernigan. Timmy Jernigan's a good.
But they're deep on the interior right now.
Yeah,
I do love Tim Jernigan. He's one of my favorite players of the last 20 years for sure. He was hilarious. He was dominant from day one. And when he was good, he was really good. Somebody asked if we're going to be any better at kicker. I'm telling you guys, we don't know. Ira and I do not know. I brag about Etsu. I brag about ETSU coming in here. I don't know. We'll see. He looked good some days, terrible some days. That's the same with the other guy. So,
yeah, it's from what we saw in the spring. It was hard to say like, oh yeah, there's no problems there, but it wasn't like they were terrible either. So yeah, that's going to be a continuation into preseason.
All right, so tomorrow is Seminole headlines, guys, and I know Ira posted it. We got posit your questions on Twitter and Facebook. Make sure you get those there. Me, Corey, and Ira will be there together tomorrow from 1 to 3. Kind of a weird week. Got a live JCS on Wednesday as well as Wake Up Warchant. I know that. Ira, any stories coming out this week that we want to push right now while we're here?
Got a few things coming up, man, but nothing I want to throw out there yet. Just some good stuff we're working on, and
hold off. That's fine.
And then recruiting's kicking up. They've got their high school camps coming up here in June. So just stay connected to warchant.com. We'll obviously be out of the softball super regional. Thursday and Friday, where we can see if the Noles punch their ticket to Oklahoma City.
So also, guys, I'll just let you know this right now. I'm not doing a goddamn thing on Friday.
Really? Good for you, buddy. What you got? You got any big plans?
I'm going to go golfing. That's what I'm going to do.
Okay, nice. Hopefully get some good weather.
Oh, I just thought I'd be a jerk. Yeah, no, I'm not doing it because Tom left me high and dry. He decided to go out of town a little early. And I'm carrying all the heavy weight Wednesday and Thursday. It's what I do. That guy deserves a break every now and again, I guess. So we'll just be taking Friday off. But hey, tomorrow's headlines. JCS Wake Up Warchant on Wednesday. JCS on Thursday. Peace out. Enjoy the long holiday weekend. And then on Tuesday, we're back, I think, with the headlines again the following week. So we're all good. And Ira's got a story brewing.
We got lots of good stuff. Lots of good stuff cooking.
Always. He's Ira Chaffel. I'm Jeff Cameron. Thank you, Ben. Great job as always. We appreciate all of you. Don't forget to subscribe to warchant.com. It's like $29.99. It's right there in your cushions. Go check your cushions. You'll find $29.99 right there, and you're in, and we're all doing better because of it. So go find that money and subscribe. Be good, everybody. Peace.